Hey everyone, it's Ashley. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be showing you how I created this beautiful, simple floral frame, and I did so by using 3 stamps and a masking technique, and I just thought I would show you how I went about doing that today. I'm going to be using this Build a Bouquet stamp set from Stampendous, and I'm going to use that 3 rose stamp along with the hydrangea stamp and the leaf stamp. And I've gone ahead and pre-cut some masks for those stamps, and basically all I did was stamp those particular stamps on a piece of removable adhesive paper and cut them out as close to the line as I possibly could. Because I'll be watercoloring, I'm going to use a 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 piece of Strathmore cold press watercolor paper, and I'm using a piece of scrap paper underneath the paper that I'm stamping on because I'm going to give it that frame look, so I want them to hang off of the sides of the paper a bit. And because I am watercoloring, I will be using VersaFine Onyx Black ink because this is a waterproof ink. Here I am adhering the masks over the tri-rose bouquet that we have there, and as you can see it hangs off a bit because it is hanging off of the paper, so I'm just going to go in and trim those extra pieces that are hanging off because I don't want it to stick to my mat. I'm now going in and using the leaf stamp, and when you're masking or using a masking technique, you have to think backwards. So normally if you were layering things, the first layer would be underneath, but when you're masking, the first layer is always going to be on top because once you remove that mask, anything you've stamped over it won't appear on top because you've taken the mask off, if that makes any sense. And if it doesn't make sense, don't worry, it's a little bit tricky, but you'll see later in the video. I've also masked off those leaf stamps, and so what I'm going to do now is go in with this hydrangea stamp and continue the frame, and I want it to look sort of circular, almost like a wreath, and we're just really zoomed in on the center of the wreath. Again, I'm going to go ahead and mask these off, and I know that there's a little spot there between the bottom hydrangea and that leaf, but you'll see that I cover it up actually with a little tiny bit of that hydrangea stamp again, just to make it look like the stamp continues on into the next part of the floral pattern, which is that leaf. And you'll notice the other times that I stamped this 3 rose stamp, I used it sort of in the same orientation, but this time I'm going to flip the stamp so that it comes into the cardstock a little more. Rather than framing the actual corner, it's going to come in from that corner, if that makes any sense. And this is a really good tip just so that you can make these stamps look like different stamps, not always exactly the same, just by changing the orientation a bit. I'm inking up my last stamp here, which is the leaf. And I'm also going to be adding a few other leaves just to come into the frame a bit, because I don't want it to look perfectly framed. I want it to look just like a bouquet of flowers and with, you know, some leaves and some flowers coming in and out. So I didn't want the lines to be perfect. So this is the before where all the mask is still on. And as I peel it off, it will be a little hard to realize only because it is all black and white and there are a lot of lines. But if you look closely, you can easily see that some of the flowers look like they are on top or underneath the other flowers or the leaves, and I just think that gives it a really cool look. And we created this entire frame just with 3 stamps, and it does take a little while sometimes to mask things off, but the payoff is always worth it. I'm going to be doing some watercoloring now, so I'm going to grab my Gansai Tambi palette, and I have swatched the inside of the cover so that I have a better idea of what the colors look like when they are on the paper. I highly suggest you do this for all of your watercolors, even like watercolor pencils and things like that, because they can look very different in the pan than when they are on the paper. This palette is really great because these little pans are removable, and so you can take just the pieces that you need with you. This is a pretty large palette, so it takes up quite a bit of room. And while I'm watercoloring, I am going to put a bit of music on for you, but I would just like to mention that I'm using a number 5 round Royal and Langnickel brush, and I bought this at Michael's, so I think that you should have a pretty easy time finding it if you are interested. Also, just so you know, everything is linked in the description, as well as my blog if you'd like to take a look at that. Now that we are done watercoloring, I'm going to speed the process up a bit and hit it with my heat tool. And I'm just going to do this for the sake of the video, but you absolutely could let this dry on its own. But as I have mentioned in the past, I am pretty impatient, so I like to help it along, though I know that a lot of people do prefer just letting it dry naturally. I really am into the black watercolor splash marks on watercolor paintings lately. So I took the black from that Gansai Tambi palette, and I'm going to get this round brush nice and wet, get a lot of color on the brush, and just hit it against my finger so that it flicks a little bit all over the paper. I just feel like this looks very artsy and I really like it. If you want a bit more control over where you are putting these splatters and splashes, you can definitely put it on the end of an acrylic block like you're going to see me do now. Just make sure that there's a lot of water in there, and then you can just flick it exactly where you want it. Sometimes you do tend to get bigger splatters if you are doing it just right off of your finger or kind of tapping it, but at least with the acrylic block, you get the control of exactly where it ends up. I'm going to be using the Smile die, which is part of the new Catherine Pooler release. And I want to use that scrap piece of paper because I don't like to waste anything, especially paper. So I'm going to cut it 3 times out of this paper. And here they are. And I am going to be embossing the top layer because all 3 of these are going to be in one layer. I'm going to emboss the top with gold embossing powder. So I'm just going to pat my Versamark ink pad right onto that die cut, and I'll pour the embossing powder right over the die. And I have gotten a couple questions before. I can't remember which post it was for. I believe a Catherine Pooler post, but I double emboss most die cuts if I'm completely embossing them because, as you can see, it's a bit, I don't know, just looks like sandy or something. So I do double emboss all of them. It just gives a nice smooth appearance to it, and that's really the only reason I do it. It's not necessary. I'm going to now layer these die one on top of the other just to give it a little more of like a chipboard appearance, and I'm going to use Tombow Mono liquid glue. Going back to that scrap paper because I just can't let it go, I am going to use Altenews Label Love, and I'm going to use the stamp You Rock because honestly, I just like the size on my card. This set is really cool because all of the labels look just like those old school labels, and I think it will really bring out the black splatter. I'm going to adhere the Smile die with that Tombow Mono liquid glue. Just make sure that it's nice and straight and exactly where I'd like it. And I'm adhering the You Rock stamp with some foam tape, and because it's so thin, I just cut a little square from the foam tape and then cut that in half to make thinner rectangles. We got to save our foam tape. Save the foam tape. So I'm now adhering that where I think that it looks best, and I'm taking a 110-pound cardstock cut at 5.5, and I'm scoring it at 4.25. And this is to make a sort of a side folding card, but I'm going to be using it as a top folding card because I did this in the landscape orientation. I am putting lots of foam tape on the back because the paper did warp a bit. But that's pretty much it. This is the card. I love the colors. It's so nice and bright for spring, and I hope that you guys enjoyed. Check out my blog if you are so interested, and I will see you soon. Bye.